With a gesture both delicate and strong, Mrs. Watson knelt in front of the children, stretching her wings wide and holding them steady, but quivering. "On to my back now," the new voice said. The children took hesitant steps toward the beautiful creature. "But what do we call you now?" Calvin asked. "Oh, my dears," came the new voice, a rich voice, with the warmth of woodwind, the clarity of a trumpet, and the mystery of an English horn. "You can't go on changing my name each time I metamorphose, and I've had such pleasure being Mrs. Watson, I think you'd better keep to that." She, he, it, smiled at them, and the radiance of the smile was as tangible as a soft breeze, as directly warming as the rays of sun. "Come!" Charles Wallace clambered up. Meg and Calvin followed him, Meg sitting between the two boys. A tremor went through the great wings, and then Mrs. Watson lifted, and they were moving through the air. Meg soon found that there was no need to cling to Charles Wallace or Calvin. The great creature's flight was serenely smooth. The boys were eagerly looking around the landscape. "Look!" Charles Wallace pointed. "The mountains are so tall that you can't see where they end." Meg looked upwards, and indeed, the mountains seemed to be reaching into infinity. They left the fertile fields and flew across a great plateau of granite-like rock, shaped into enormous monoliths. These had a definite rhythmic form, but they were not statues. They were nothing like Meg had ever seen before, and she wondered if they had been made by wind and weather, by the formation of this earth, or if they were a creation of beings like the one on which she rode. They left the great granite plain and flew over a garden even more beautiful than anything in a dream. In it were gathered many of the creatures like the ones Mrs. Watson had become, some lying among the flowers, some swimming in a broad crystal river that flowed through the garden, some flying in what Meg was sure must be a kind of dance, moving in and out above the trees. They were making music, music that came not only from their throats, but from the movement of their great wings as well. "What are they singing?" Meg asked excitedly. Mrs. Watson shook her beautiful head. "It won't go into your words. I can't possibly transfer it into your words. Are you getting any of it, Charles?" Charles Wallace sat very still on the broad back, on his face an intently listening look, the look he had when he delved into Meg or his mother. "A little, just a very little, but I think I could get more in time." "Yes, you could learn it, Charles, but there isn't time. We can only stay here long enough to rest up and make a few preparations." Meg hardly listened to her. "I want to know what they're saying. I want to know what it means." "Try, Charles," Mrs. Watson urged. "Try to translate. You can let yourself go now. You don't have to hold back." "But I can't," Charles Wallace cried in an anguished voice. "I don't know enough. Not yet." "Then try to work with me, and I'll see if I can't verbalize it a little for them." Charles Wallace got his look of probing, of listening. "I know that look," Meg thought suddenly. "Now I think I know what it means, because I've had it myself, sometimes doing math with Father, when a problem is just about to come clear." Mrs. Watson seemed to be listening to Charles' thoughts. "Well, yes, that's an idea. I can try. Too bad you don't really know it, so you can give it to me direct, Charles. It's so much more work this way." "Don't be lazy," Charles said. Mrs. Watson did not take offense. She explained, "Oh, It's my favorite kind of work, Charles. That's why they chose me to come along, even though I'm so much younger. It's my one real talent, but it takes a tremendous amount of energy, and we're going to need every ounce of energy for what's ahead of us. But I'll try. For Calvin and Meg, I'll try." She was silent. The great wings almost stopped moving. Only a delicate stir seemed to keep them aloft. "Listen, then," Mrs. Watson said. The resonant voice rose, and the words seemed to be all around them, so that Meg felt that she could almost reach out and touch them. "Sing unto the Lord a new song, and his praise from the end of the earth. Ye that go down to the sea, and all that is therein, the isles and the inhabitants thereof. Let the wilderness and the cities thereof lift their voice. Let the inhabitants of the rocks sing. Let them shout from the top of the mountains. Let them give glory unto the Lord." Throughout her entire body, Meg felt a pulse of joy such as she had never known before. Calvin's hand reached out. He did not clasp her hand in his. He moved his fingers so that they were barely touching hers. But joy flowed through them, back and forth between them, around them and about them and inside them. When Miss Watson sighed, it seemed completely incomprehensible that through this bliss could come the faintest whisper of doubt. "We must go now, children." Mrs. Watson's voice was deep with sadness, and Meg could not understand. Raising her head, Mrs. Watson gave a call that seemed to be a command, and one of the creatures flying above the trees nearest them raised its head to listen, and then flew off and picked 3 flowers from a tree growing near the river, and brought them over. "Each of you take one," Mrs. Watson said. "I'll tell you how to use them later." As Meg took her flower, she realized that it was not a single blossom, but hundreds of tiny flowerets forming a kind of hollow bell. "Where are we going?" Calvin asked. "Up." The wings moved steadily, swiftly. The garden was left behind, the stretch of granite, the mighty shapes, and then Mrs. Watson was flying upward, climbing steadily up, up. Below them the trees of the mountain dwindled, became sparse, were replaced by bushes, and then small dry grasses, and then vegetation ceased entirely, and there were only rocks, points and peaks of rock, sharp and dangerous. "Hold on tight," Mrs. Watson said. "Don't slip." Meg felt Calvin's arm circle her waist in a secure hold. Still they moved upward. Now they were in clouds. They could see nothing but drifting whiteness, and the moisture clung to them and condensed in icy droplets. As Meg shivered, Calvin's grip tightened. In front of her, Charles Wallace sat quietly. Once he turned, just long enough to give her a swift glance of tenderness and concern. But Meg felt as each moment passed that he was growing further and further away, that he was becoming less and less her adored baby brother, and more one of whatever kind of being Mrs. Watson, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Which in actuality were. Abruptly they burst out of the clouds into a shaft of light. Below them there were still rocks. Above them the rocks continued to reach up into the sky. But now, though it seemed miles upward, Meg could see where the mountain at last came to an end. Mrs. Watson continued to climb, her wings straining a little. Meg felt her heart racing. Cold sweat began to gather on her face and lips, and felt as though they were turning blue. She began to gasp. "All right, children. Use your flowers "Now," Mrs. Watson said, "the atmosphere will continue to get thinner from now on. Hold the flowers up to your face and breathe through them, and they will give you enough oxygen. It won't be as much as you're used to, but it will be enough." Meg had almost forgotten the flowers, and was grateful to realize that she was still clasping them, that she hadn't let them fall from her fingers. She pressed her face into the blossoms and breathed deeply. Calvin still held her with one arm, but he, too, held the flowers to his face. Charles Wallace moved the hand with the flowers slowly, almost as though he were in a dream. Mrs. Watson's wings strained against the thinness of the atmosphere. The summit was only a little way above them, and then they were there. Mrs. Watson came to rest on a small plateau of smooth, silvery rock. There ahead of them was a great white disk. "One of Uriel's moons," Mrs. Watson told them, her mighty voice faintly breathless. "Oh, it's beautiful!" Meg cried. "It's beautiful!" The silver light from the enormous moon poured over them, blending with the golden quality of the day, flowing over the children, over Mrs. Watson, over the mountain peak. "Now we will turn around," Mrs. Watson said, and at the quality of her voice, Meg was afraid again. But when they turned, she saw nothing. Ahead of them was the thin, clear blue of sky. Below them, the rocks thrusting out of the shifting sea of white clouds. "Now we will wait," Mrs. Watson said, "for sunset and moonset." Almost as she spoke, the light began to deepen, to darken. "I want to watch the moonset," Charles Wallace said. "No, child. Do not turn around, any of you. Face out towards the dark. What I have to show you will be more visible then. Look ahead, straight ahead, as far as you can possibly look." Meg's eyes ached from the strain of looking and seeing nothing. Then, above the clouds which encircled the mountain, she seemed to see a shadow, a faint thing of darkness so far off that she was scarcely sure she was really seeing it. Charles Wallace said, "What's that?" "That sort of shadow out there," Calvin gestured. "What is it? I don't like it." "Watch," Mrs. Watson commanded. It was a shadow, nothing but a shadow. It was not even as tangible as a cloud. Was it cast by something, or was it a thing in itself? The sky darkened. The gold left the light, and they were surrounded by blue, blue deepening until, where there had been nothing but the evening sky, there was now a faint pulse of star, and then another, and another, and another. There were more stars than Meg had ever seen before. "The atmosphere is so thin here," Mrs. Watson said, as though in answer to her unasked question, "that it does not obscure your vision as it would at home. Now look straight ahead." Meg looked. The dark shadow was still there. It had not lessened or dispersed with the coming of night. And where the shadow was, the stars were not visible. What could there be about a shadow that was so terrible that she knew that there had never been before, or ever would be again, anything that would chill her with a fear that was beyond shuddering, beyond crying or screaming, beyond the possibility of comfort? Meg's hand holding the blossom slowly dropped, and it seemed as though a knife gashed through her lungs. She gasped, but there was no air for her to breathe. Darkness glazed her eyes and mind, but as she started to fall into unconsciousness, her head dropped down into the flowers, which she was still clutching, and as she inhaled the fragrance of their purity, her mind and body revived, and she sat up. The shadow was still there, dark and dreadful. Calvin held her hand strongly in his, but she felt neither strength nor reassurance in his touch. Beside her a tremor went through Charles Wallace, but he sat very still. He shouldn't be seeing this, Meg thought. This is too much for so little a boy, no matter how different and extraordinary a little boy. Calvin turned, rejecting the dark thing that blotted out the light of the stars. "Make it go away, Mrs. Watson," he whispered. "Make it go away. It's evil." Slowly the great creature turned around so that the shadow was behind them, so that they saw only the stars unobscured, the soft throb of starlight on the mountain, and the descending circle of the great moon swiftly slipping over the horizon. Then, without a word from Mrs. Watson, they were traveling downward, down, down. When they reached the corona of clouds, Mrs. Watson said, "You can breathe without the flowers now, my children." Silence again. Not a word. It was as though the shadow had somehow reached out with its dark power and touched them so that they were incapable of speech. When they got back to the flowery field, bathed now in starlight and moonlight from another, smaller, yellower rising moon, a little of the tenseness went out of their bodies, and they realized that the body of the beautiful creature on which they rode had been as rigid as theirs. With a graceful gesture it dropped to the ground and folded its great wings. Charles Wallace was the first to slide off. "Mrs. Who? Mrs. Which?" he called, and there was an immediate quivering in the air. Mrs. Who's familiar glasses gleamed at them. Mrs. Which appeared too, but, as she had told the children, it was difficult for her to materialize completely, and though there was the robe and the peaked hat, Meg could look through them to mountain and stars. She slid off Mrs. Watson's back and walked rather unsteadily after the long ride over to Mrs. Which. "The dark thing we saw," she said. "Is that what my father is fighting?" "Yes," Mrs. Which said. "He is behind the darkness so that even we cannot see him."